I am live. All right, so we got Facebook here, we got Instagram here. This is gonna be interesting. But yeah, so this conversation monologue today has a lot to do with like transparency and transformation. They stem from the same word for a reason, probably, right? But I really wanted it to come out of just a point of transparency for my life. Is a lot of, my transformation came from learning how to manage my stress. And recently I have been being put to the test about how to manage my stress, given that I bring stressors into my life. So there's a form of management. Like, we don't welcome things that we stress, but we also have to endure stress to be able to know how to manage stress and what that balance looks like. And I feel like I'm at a point in my life right now where I can use a very real circumstance. I've been successful in being able to release myself from 160 pounds of weight, and by doing the program that, if I'm honest with you guys, I didn't do because I would never have to do this again. I did it because I knew life was going to throw me things in my future that would require me to know how to do what I've done. And it really came a lot down to stress management, emotional regulation, and learning how to really navigate the complicated territory of what emotions and feelings in that world of what therapy is. And that was kind of the inside perspective that I had as a therapist, is that I was helping all of these other people do this thing of like change and like get your life together, and I wasn't doing it myself. So it was you've heard me say often, it was a practice what you preach, but a lot of it came down to stress management. And I think probably one of the most stressful things, according to, science, the big 5 stressors was moving, death and loss, divorce, and there's 2 other ones, but I'm not gonna quote those right now for y'all. You can Google them, big 5 stressors of life. I'm gonna focus more on the loss today, because I feel like that is the transparent message of what I'm going through right now. I have to, basically the program that I have been put together is a continuous program, one that you continue, you keep practicing it, and it in different places in your life, and it will continue to evolve and to grow with you. It can't be all the time counting calories, because the thing is you're not gonna always be able to eat a certain amount of calories a day. Sometimes you eat less, sometimes you eat more. So I really wanted to talk about, and just in context, what does coping with loss look like? And I think the most probably prevalent concept of loss that we deal with is death. I'm not going to talk about that today. I talk about death a lot, honestly. But I want to talk about intentional loss. What are the things that you have to intentionally, purposefully remove from your life? And do you actually consider the magnitude of what grieving and coping with the stress of that loss actually does to a mission of you trying to be healthy and remain in a healthy mindset? So I'm going to use an example for myself, and that is right now is financial stress is the stressor that I'm successful in a lot of ways, but I took risks in starting businesses and making investments that, with risks, sometimes a lot of reward comes, but sometimes a lot of mistakes are made. So I'm in a position now where I'm trying to scale myself while at the same time scale back financially, because we have to do this kind of ebb and flow with how the rest of the world operates. And we live in a capitalist society. So, if you haven't made it yet, like if you aren't living in, the true investment and manifestation of money and the energy you put towards the work that you do, then you still have to be very aware and conscious of the amount of money and just the relationship you have with money, and doing what it takes to make sure that you protect the money and the resources that you have. So how does money and loss come into fruition, Sarah? Okay, great question, y'all. So in context, today I'm having to make a decision about intentionally losing something that I worked really hard for, and that's selling things. Like and I feel like, let me just go ahead and say this is not a request for money. I'm using this as an example because I have committed to doing what it takes to make sure that my peace is prioritized. Stress and peace, they tend not to be able to dwell sometimes in the same existence. So, we have to be willing to do and lose things that we don't want to. I have to consider, now it's not that I have to, and I'm like in a position where it's like, I'm gonna go completely broke if I don't lose this one thing. But the context of like, I'll just be honest with you, I'm looking at selling my car. I'm looking at the whole goal of where I'm at right now is reduce debt, because I had to take risks and expand my debt in certain places to grow business, but that also puts a strain on the other debts that I have. Like, I can't carry that much debt. I'm literally going to be stuck. Kind of going back to like the beginning of when my transformation happened, I don't think a lot of people if you haven't heard me say this, you would not know this, but this change actually started with my relationship with money. I was eating out at Dunkin' Donuts. I don't know if you've watched my stories. I'm a Dunkin' girl. I grew up in New England, and I was spending an average of $7 to $10, almost like 4 or 5 times a week, of eating out just for breakfast. Iced coffee, you get a coffee, you gotta get something else in the morning. So I was spending this much money, and as a social worker, and at that point in time, I was very new to entrepreneurship, and in social work, we just don't get paid as much as, we don't do this for the money, right? But I had to take a look at what my credit was. I had to take a look at how much money I was spending just passively putting on credit cards, and then the consequence of, interest and stuff like that. So this health transformation was actually started with money. And there's no coincidence that I'm here full circle again, having practiced this and been very successful in being able to accomplish the goal that a lot of people see as, being healthier and losing weight. But it actually started with my relationship with money. Why was I spending that money? Why was that money so precious to me but at the same time, I wasn't giving it the value that it deserved? That I was just giving it to someone else versus taking a look at what I can do to put more value on what I already had. And so this current day, like, that was the first way that it manifested. So the changes I made back then was I didn't restrict not having my iced coffee, because that's just silly. I tried something different, and I ordered a cold brew, what's it called? Cold brew like infuser, to make my own iced coffee. And it sucked at first. It was bitter. I read the instructions. I took my time with it. But I had to play around with it a little bit. I had to make some sacrifices to it just being something I ordered in an app and I could go pick up real quick on the way to work, which meant I had to sacrifice a little bit more time. I had to sacrifice a little bit more of my patience, because I had to figure out how I wanted, my iced coffee to taste. I still was able to, once I figured it out, I was able to find a creamer that was like, it got enough of the job done that it was low on sugar. So I was still prioritizing getting my body free of all of those just blockage chemicals. So processed sugar, not necessarily like any sugar, but just lowering my overall added sugar content just in coffee. That was one small thing that I could do. And I was successful in finding that in a fairly healthy, organic way to a point where I could sustain making my own coffee, putting what I found that it required of me was about, I think it was probably like maybe 10, 15 minutes every other day or so, because the amount of like iced coffee that I love, what required me to do, and then of course just the pitcher that I bought required me to make the coffee every 2 days. And it took 48 hours for the cold brew, the process to actually kind of like come together and it not be acidic. So without getting into details of that, but you know, that change was very significant in how I was able to look at the overall sustainability. So back then example, let me come to this example right here, right now, because I also have to be somewhere at 10:30. Because like I said, if you go back to the beginning, I didn't quite overbook myself, but I definitely made it a little tight. So in practice of all like that one principle of intentionally having to sacrifice, but not necessarily fully losing what I loved, which was the routine of me drinking iced coffee, of getting to enjoy something that I wanted in my life. The only thing I lost was the routine and hopefully the amount of money that I had to spend out long term from spending, let's just say $10 at least 3 or 4 times a week. So about $30 a week on one meal I spent, I think the pitcher was $25 up front. And then it was just the time of trying to get that into my routine of making the iced coffee. So for the long term, I actually saved a really decent amount of money. I'm not going to do the math for y'all, but that was the where I started. After 3 or 4 years and a lot of mistakes made, and a lot of those mistakes being in the next level up, which was me looking at going into business for myself and with someone, I'm at another standpoint where I'm having to do that again. What can I intentionally sacrifice that is going to help me reserve my peace for the short term so I can be in line with the long-term outcome here? And that's my car. I really actually have come to love my car. When I first got my car, it was out of a point of stress because I had a repair I had to make, and I couldn't use, as a homeowner at the time, I couldn't use all my cash to make this repair, and I didn't want to put it on my credit cards. I had actually been successful at that point in paying down a lot of my credit cards because my unhealthy ways of eating out, codependent behaviors had me going into credit card debt and spending more than I was actually had coming in, and I had convinced myself that that was okay. But in reality, the true balance comes in giving yourself that perspective of like, all right, I don't always have to just give myself what I want. I sometimes have to really focus on what I need. And right now, for me in this day, my peace of mind about having to handle the responsibilities that I signed up for financially in the process of leveling up and putting my program to the test, I was successful in managing the program. I did put myself under a lot of intentional stress that I probably would have done differently, but then I'm also going to put them in my program for y'all to not necessarily have to make the same mistakes that I did. But my car has become the focal point of like, as long as I have a vehicle that gets me somewhere, and I also work remotely, so that helps a lot, that a car payment for a certain presentation, at least right now in my life, is not the most important thing to me. The important thing to me is that I feel like I can manage all of the responsibilities that I signed up for, that I literally can't get myself away from because I've got, creditors or credit cards or whatever, right? But I don't need that particular thing. And I think a lot of people, especially in our society today, we get really caught up in a lot of, let me finish one sentence. We get really caught up on what we think we need, but it's really a want. And a lot of it comes down to look, and it comes down to aesthetic. We are allowed to treat ourselves, but we do not have to convince ourselves that a treat, like a want, is the only thing that's going to get us motivated to do something different for ourselves. And this happens to us all the time. Like, we are bypassed by the universe for the things that we want often, and we're always left with everything that we need. And so I had to take a real hard look at, is this car something that I really need? Do I need to hold on to this degree of a payment because it is sleek looking, because it fits the persona of a this influencer that I guess I'm trying to become. We're still working that one out. I'm trying to influence people, but I'm definitely not necessarily trying to be the influencer, because the reality is I can't just quit my job. I love my job. I can't just cut back or do something different because I have to prioritize my health. I had to work it into this system that I already had. And that requires us taking a look at, what do we want and what do we need? And what is it that we think is a need, but is actually a want? And so for the example in my life, it's my car. I don't need that car. What I need is to be able to know that my peace is prioritized, that I can sleep knowing I don't have to make any other big sacrifices as long as I have a transportation, which I have a plan for that. But I don't need that one thing. And I think a lot of people, and I was one of them, I got my first car. I signed on the dotted line before I even got my paycheck out of grad school. I remember, it's funny because she comes right in the room right when I'm about to use an example of when I met this person. I remember pulling up after I hadn't even got my first paycheck at my first job, and I got this new car, and that was when I signed on for this lump of like debt that still to this day is rolled into the car payment that I have, rolled into the car payment that I'm hopefully about to go remove from my credit for the first time, because I had to be willing to sacrifice something that I want to keep. I wanted to keep this car. I didn't want to have to clean it out. I didn't want to have to give it up. It's got leather seats, it's got heated seats. It's really nice. But I'm conserving so I am in this for the long run. And that's a long history to that was 2014 was when I got my first car payment. My mom was pissed. That's the one thing my mom told me not to do, is never buy a new car. Guess what I did? She's heard multiple times that she was correct in that. However, I also probably wouldn't have done it any differently, because if I had, I wouldn't be sitting here today telling you guys it's not necessarily about you can't buy a new car, but it's about the timing of it. It's about whether or not it is a want or a need. And for me back then, I wanted that so bad. It hit off. It had the right color. It was an SUV. I had been in this older, car for so long, and I was just like, no, I needed it. I got a big girl job now, so I'm going to go do it. I can manage it. Little did I know, as soon as I signed on for that life was going to hand me all the other challenges that come with life. And that, to this day, it lost value. The debt rolled over into another car payment, because then I upgraded, because I was like, well, this car is just too small. I was in this constant state of just not being satisfied with what I was putting towards the things that I thought were important to me. But really it came down to is they weren't needs. They were truly wants. In today's modern world, we need transportation. So I'm using this as an example, and hopefully the undertone here is, how do you deal and prioritize your peace and manage the stress that you have? It does sometimes have to come down to you intentionally losing things. And this car for me today, which I'm putting out there, is you guys send me some positive vibes that this is the true time, because when in history have you ever had equity in a car? I don't know about you guys, but I've never, like, house and real estate makes sense in terms of long-term investment. Cars, we're programmed to know that they depreciate. But for the first time, as hard as I've worked, I'm in a position where I have to intentionally lose something if I'm willing to, and it actually could work in my favor to get equity out of a car. The only reason it's such a big deal to me is because I learned so much about this transformation from that car, and that's going to probably be another talk that I do. But just to give y'all like a little background, it's like how because I drive a hybrid. I chose the hybrid to try to save money because it doesn't use as much gas, which is very true. But it also, the inner workings of how that car worked really helped me realize the power and long-term success that we can have when we prioritize sustainability in anything that we do. When you cut back on your footprint on the world, you ultimately make room for receiving things that you never knew you needed. So I think I hit all the points that I wanted to. And when we take a look at what is transformation it takes transparency. I'm sitting here for you today. I've been stressed. So to me, it's like, okay, that is the pinnacle of what it took for me to make this change. Was I had to learn how to manage stress from an emotional internal side, but then also taking a look at what things in my life cause me stress. If I have unnecessary stressors, I need to be able to do something about those. And really the only thing that's keeping me attached to not losing those things is me. If I didn't want, I could save over, I'll give you like $500 a month just by being willing to let go of this one thing so I can replace it with something a little bit less desirable, and to be able to, and it'll be okay. Like, I'm going to eventually get what I want, but we have to be willing to make the sacrifice short term of doing things that we don't necessarily want to do, but we may need to do in order to conserve the resources that we have, whether that's energy, time, money, or whatever. You have to be able to do a short-term no for yourself, and it's not worth the long-term stress, and do something about it in order to get the long-term outcomes. So yeah, that's what I'm about to go do. I'm supposed to be there in like 5 minutes, but good thing it's right down the road. For this person to buy my car. For me to, let it happen. So hopefully that made sense for y'all. Just take a look and take an inventory of like, what do you have that can, you can just kind of intentionally let go of, that is not really worth you carrying long term. And it could lead to 160 pounds of weight loss just by you kind of letting go of it. It has nothing to do with weight. It has probably a lot to do with money. Your relationship with money is at the crux of your relationship with food and getting healthy. So just remember, for the price of an iced coffee, you could really change your life. I did it. Anyone can do it. It's possible. It's small changes, and you take it in stride. So, the live will be available for y'all to recap. And hopefully it will make sense for y'all. And I will see y'all next Friday with a new message.